I think as a real estate investor, to remember that, yes, you are running a business, but you're in the business of what is someone's home or their shelter, which is super important. And I think being able to, I think if I had to go back and do it, I would have really taken the time to maybe get to understand what was really going on and ask different questions while I was in escrow and maybe when I first went to talk to her as well.
I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter. Today I have with me John Alden. So I have known John through my meeting and a couple of the platforms and have referred him business and have worked with him on some projects, but mostly referred him business on client projects. For at least 6 years is what we've decided, about 6 years or so. Yep. John is truly a specialist in what I call West Side real estate. That's where he sort of cut his teeth. It's also where he also invests himself. So as you know, I'm a great believer in, if you're going to work with a professional, they should be somebody that also has their own investment portfolio, because it really helps you learn from somebody who's not just a professional in the field, but also an investor in the field. And if you want to become an investor or buy investment grade products or multifamily units or single families, what better person to use than somebody who has the point of view as an investor, because they are an investor themselves. So let me read a little bit about John's company here. So Alden Pacific Investments is a commercial real estate brokerage and consulting firm based in Santa Monica, California, that specializes in helping companies and investors with their commercial real estate requirements, including acquisitions, disposition, analysis, stabilization of multifamily investment properties. Our focus is multifamily investment in real estate assets. Alden Pacific Investments excels as a client-focused, client-first, detail-oriented partner for investors in Southern California. And I actually would say, John, this is very much my experience of you guys as well. So John, why don't you talk a little bit about your approach to investing in real estate? And I'm going to pair that with, how did you get started?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's easiest to talk about how I got started.
Sure, let's do that first.
Because like most people in California, it feels like I actually am not from here originally. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay.
And in college and throughout college, I really loved real estate. Always had, took a lot of construction management classes, really wanted to learn about the industry. I graduated right after the Great Recession. So I was obviously a little bit scared about it, to go into the real estate. My family was like, no, you're crazy to do that. So I actually did corporate sales for about 10 years. Okay. After I had an epiphany to come to California. I was selling hernia mesh at the border of Canada and Minnesota in the middle of February. And I just thought, there has to be more than this. So I got on a plane and flew to California, got a job. And after I'd been here for about 6 to 12 months, I had this weird realization. And that was based on my experience. Where I came from, it seemed like everyone who had, you got a job, you worked your way up through middle management, you got to save up your 401k, and then you were rich and you could retire happily and everything would be okay. But in California, I noticed it was really weird. There was a lot of people and they seemed to have all this money. I couldn't figure out what they were doing because they all seemed happy and kind of free in this group I fell into. And I kind of realized, oh, they own real estate. That's cool. And so I figured, you know what, I want to become a residential broker. I wanted to sell luxury homes in Malibu. And Jeff Chonis, who you know, I talked to him about it, and he said, and Jeff, for everyone out there, is kind of a mentor to me. And he said, no, you have to learn to invest. And he brought me in to a brokerage that I worked at previously and really started teaching me about investments and investment real estate. After I closed a few deals, I kind of started saving my commissions, and I bought my first multifamily property. It was a duplex in Silverlake, actually. And that was really how I got started. Based on my own experience and what I've learned, we really focus on making sure people understand numbers and understand what their goals are. But also, I think that due diligence component of a real estate investment is super important. And Christina, you've been a mentor to me. That's something you've always stressed too.
Hugely.
Yeah.
Usually due diligence cannot be possibly good enough. You just,
Yeah. As much as you do, there's always more.
there's always
So,
more you could be doing.
yeah.
So I know that one of the things that I find particularly exciting about your team and your approach, and I'm going to share here your team. So, there's, Alden Pacific Meet, our team, and there's John, and there's Jeff, who's with you as far as one of your senior associates, as well as Vincent Cook. You have really cultivated among your team a particular approach and a particular philosophy. And that's, I know some of that has been formed through your history, which, Buckingham Investments, you were with them for a while, but really
Yeah.
you've taken it and you've stepped it up. You've taken on the full mantle of it, I feel like. And I know that Jeff has a similar point of view. I don't know, Vincent as well, where you guys truly work for the investors, for their best interest, and you have their back. So why don't you describe a little more deeply about that? Because obviously I, as a professional investor, care a lot about having my agent having that point of view.
Yeah. I think buying real estate, no matter how experienced you are, is an incredibly emotional process, and it can feel very, very daunting when you start wanting to make a big decision, because it is a lot of money. And since it is a real asset, I think there's, being able to see it, there's something that it elicits a very emotional response. We really want for our clients to really have them know what we know. And by doing that, we can kind of work with them on a one-to-one level to help them really create wealth and grow their portfolios aggressively if they want, or not aggressively if they want. But taking that time to be with them and really work on that analysis portion of their existing portfolio, or if they're new and want to start deploying capital to do that, I think kind of helps lend some credence and really help people feel comfortable with what they're doing and see success. I'm going to talk about a little later that first duplex in Silverlake was a great learning opportunity for me, because I think we're pretty stringent on our underwriting requirements, and we're more conservative, I think, than some might like to be. But yeah, we really focus on making sure our clients' goals are achieved and met in a realistic and safe way. So.
Yeah, I think one of the words that was used in your in the bio I just read is something about not mentorship. Let's see, specializing company investors and then real estate, including acquisition, dispute analysis, stabilization, client first, detail-oriented partners for investors in Southern California. And I think that one of the ways I see you guys doing that is through almost this mentorship basis. And I don't want to say that you guys are mentors, because I know that that's not necessarily your commitment.
The word we use is clarity and transparency.
Okay. Go for it. Yep.
Yeah, it's something we take really seriously. And we'd say it's one of our principles. Our vision must be followed by the venture. So I think in real estate or any industry where there's a large amounts of money moving around relatively quickly, it can feel there's a feeling of, it doesn't feel comfortable all the time, because if you don't understand the game and you're about to make these huge investments, it feels very uncomfortable. So when we talk about creating clarity and transparency, what we're really trying to do is make sure we want our clients not only to be getting answers from us, but we want them to have a team around them that either they find or we can help refer them. We're not vertically integrated, but people that they can know and trust as well, where they can go and get answers from as well. I think when there's one single kind of bottleneck of information to people, it just can create a lot of vagueness, and that doesn't feel very good when you're investing money. So yeah.
No, it's fine. I say not when due diligence is one of the primary things. Only one, but one of the primary things that underwrites your success as an investor in a property is your due diligence, and that's done best by your team, but the people who are experts in that slot. Like, weird story. I was buying a multi-unit. It was in the Van Nuys, Sherman Oaks area. And the physical inspector gave me his report. Said, yeah, it's pretty good. Actually, you've got this, I don't know what it's called, but it's an overhang structure where your parking is underneath, and that can be a problem because it sags, but you have a flat roof, which can also be a problem. but the overhang structure looks okay. The flat roof doesn't look too bad, blah, blah, blah. So all this conversation, by the way, your plumbing's not very good. I'm like, I kind of know my plumbing's not very good. So I had my plumber look at it, and my plumber was on the phone with me for a good 5 to 8 minutes going, this is a horrible building, Christina. You need to not buy this. You're a newer investor. I need to tell you that this is a horrible building and you shouldn't, and it literally, as a newer investor, I wasn't quite in tears, but I was definitely in a panic. I'm like, what am I doing? I don't know. Like, and it was one of my first larger units, so I didn't know what to do. So I called my financial advisor, and my financial advisor was very clear with me. He said, so your physical inspector said it was okay, but the plumbing wasn't great, and you knew that. And so you're planning on replacing the plumbing, but your plumber said it was horrible. Does your plumber, is he a physical inspector as well? Is he a longtime investor? Does he have an eye for the value of the building above and beyond its plumbing? And I kind of went, no, probably not. I kind of went, got it. You need to use the experts in your team for the experts they are. He was completely correct. It was a horrible building when it came to plumbing. Two buildings, two different separate structures. They both had to be replumbed. It was going to be a pain in the patootie to get it done, truly. And it was, but it meant I also got a building at a discount because it was under distress because it had a problem.
And right? I think that's kind of, I think investors sometimes, especially newer investors, I'll meet with them. They'll be like, oh, I want to, they have really grand plans and grand schemes. Right. And unfortunately, sometimes the people who are most successful are the ones who are comfortable taking those kind of risks and fixing them. Yeah. But I'm not saying for people to go out and buy a bunch of distressed assets, but being able to kind of discern that information and filter through it and understand what's a big deal and what's not a big deal is definitely a lesson that I think everyone benefits from at some point. So.
Well, and also the team, right? So
yeah.
Understanding that this team member who was the physical inspector was giving me a more overall perspective, and I could trust that overall perspective versus the plumber who was giving me a completely accurate perspective on that piece of the pie. And I got confused about my team and the team members and what their jobs were. But I think when I had somebody I could go to help me get unconfused, which is the type of thing you guys try to do as well, right?
Yeah, and I think some of it is you can build almost like processes into your investment plan. And what I mean by that is, well, can I share a story about this first investment I had? It was
Please tell you. Okay, so we're going to jump right to. So tell me about one of your worst investments, because we know real estate can be a tough mistress. Right?
Well, it's a lesson I learned on the Silverlake property. So I bought it. I was younger, very confident in my abilities as a young broker. So I bought the property. I never even did a real inspection. I had an old inspection report, figured it, whatever, it's fine. I'll figure it out. It was in LA rent control. Had a hoarder for a tenant, but I said, no mind, I'll figure it out. So learned a lot of lessons, obviously. I got my teeth kicked in a little bit, I think is the fairest way to put it. But this is a story about the foundation. So I had a handyman working on the house. And he comes up, we had a patio that kind of laid out in the front. It was an old 1920s, Spanish style duplex, shotgun style. And he'd been working under the house, and he comes up and he goes, your foundation's cracked. I said, oh, that really scared me. He goes, yeah, your foundation's shot. I was like, oh. So I called up someone I knew had bought properties, and I said, what do I do? He said, we got to get a foundation inspector out. So I called two inspectors. First inspector that came out was from a vendor. He came out and he said, foundation's completely shot. We need to totally redo it. We got to put up these special springs, proprietary springs. It's, $75,000 or whatever. I said, oh man. I was like, this is a
duplex shotgun in Silverlake. He must have spent $75,000 on a foundation fix.
And I was new enough too. It's different when you sell it versus when you actually own it, right? So you kind of like, I was going, this is not good. My wife's was kind of just like, why did we buy this thing? We could have bought it.
Yeah, right.
So I'm kind of like, okay. So then the next guy comes. He goes, no, your whole foundation isn't shot, but you do need a new cripple wall, and you got a bunch of cracks, really bad. I was like, oh, this is not good. What's the price? He said, I can do it for $35,000. I was like, ooh. So I was like, okay, but he came down a lot. So I was like, I'm just going to call a third person and see what they say.
Okay.
So I called third guy, Alpha Structural Group, by the way, for everyone out there.
Which you obviously still use today because you're willing to recommend them.
They're on one of my three. Yeah. So he comes up, he drives, goes under the house, he comes back out. He goes, I don't know what your handyman's looking at, but that was actually the concrete on your porch that was cracked. It has nothing to do with the building. So I wouldn't even worry about it. Can I have $200 for my inspection time? I was like,
what?
But he's like, who told you it was bad? And I was like, oh, it was my handyman told me. He goes, was he an engineer?
Is he an engineer, right? Is he a foundation expert?
I was like, no. He goes, yeah, I got nothing to worry about. I was like, okay. He got in his car and drove away. And so ever since then, like those sort of processes, if I have to make big decisions, I try to get at least 3 bids. And even if I've never worked with the vendors before, sometimes I think it's good to get fresh eyes on something. I'm on a transaction right now for a client, foundation problem, similar thing. And we took that kind of three vendor approach to it, and we're able to, and even though the price didn't deviate a lot and the problem, they all kind of came in with the same assumption this time, we feel comfortable at what we're spending and we know why we're spending what we're spending. Right. So I think just some of those things, we can make them habit on your real estate investments, can be really helpful. So.
Well, and you said you're doing that for a client of yours.
Yeah, it's
part of an acquisition.
Yeah. So we're representing both sides. So California is a little weird. It's one of those states where you can double end properties. So the property does have some significant deferred maintenance. It's an older building, and we're the buyer. We brought in our inspector, and the inspector uncovered some bad things on the that happened. So there's some plumbing issues, some electric issues, some foundation issues. So typically capital systems, like the big things that you want to worry about are your capital expenditures. So plumbing, roof, foundation, electric, termite, if you're in California, can be a big deal, but it's typically not. And though people will ask me sometimes, well, what is a capital expenditure? I always like to think about it as what's dollars you're going to put into the building that aren't going to generally result in higher rents. But those are the main systems. Anyways, so we have plumbing, electric, and foundation issues. And so we brought a lot of vendors out, and it's been a lot of, so yeah.
And I'm assuming that in bringing vendors out, that you're also able to maybe renegotiate the price a little bit, even though I know you're representing both sides, but I'm assuming that there's going to be some conversation about the deferred maintenance.
Yeah, we were able to come to an agreement. And I think in this case, there's a liability thing that can happen on our end if, so that clarity piece that we talk about becomes super, super important. So we brought out, we had the seller pick a couple vendors and we had the buyers pick a couple vendors, and they were very clear about what was happening. And so we all felt comfortable about when we were making that agreement and negotiating. So
good. It's actually, to me, I think it is important when you are double ending a deal, which is common. I don't find it uncommon. I often, when I'm buying flip houses, I often go through a particular guy who's double ending the deal almost every time, right? But he's also kind of going to be one of my partners by the time we're getting to the flip. So if it's not going to work for a good flip in the long run, he's also personally incentivized to make sure that he's getting the right price at the beginning, because otherwise he doesn't get his profit. So, yeah. But at the same time, yeah, we often have agents, or I often work with agents that are working on quote unquote double ending the deal. And that is when I start relying even more on the other members of the team, the physical inspector, the electrician, the plumber, the roofer, the foundation systems. The systems, or the, like you said, CapEx expenses, are the ones that can be the most startling and the biggest price point. Like, I'm replacing an HVAC heating system, right? HVAC, HVAC, right? So heating and air conditioning. In a building where I got one vendor in there and it was 11,000. I'm like, what? 11,000? Yeah. I expected 3,500. Yeah. How would I get 11,000? And so I brought in my guy, and I wanted to make sure that my guy hadn't pre-seen the other guy's number, but he came in at 11,000 too. So now I've got 2 at 11,000 and one from a trusted source who's done 2 of my other buildings. So I'm like, okay, I guess it really is $11,000 this time. Right? But like you said, the clarity and the diligence allows you to do that. So one of the things that you guys special in is west side apartment buildings. And from my old lady perspective, I expect cash on cash from my apartment buildings. You know, my first apartment building was a 7 cap. And I was happy with that, right? It worked. It
Yeah.
gave me cash flow in Southern California. But that's not the case anymore, especially on the West Side. So why don't you describe a little bit the approach that investors take when they're looking to purchase basically higher end properties, multi-units on the West Side, because the land underneath is so much more expensive alone. It changes the numbers and the way that property works from an investor's point of view.
Yeah. And we're doing a lot still in Long Beach, and then South Bay and East LA. But yeah, so the biggest issue with California is the prices are just so ridiculous. And I'm sure if anyone's ever gone on Zillow or Redfin or LoopNet or and poked around in Crexy and looked around at what they've seen, they just might be like, what? This doesn't make any sense. Like, why would anyone buy this stuff? And I feel that way too sometimes when I look at the prices. It's just insane. But I think where the real value is on that dirt is there's a supply and demand problem. There's not enough housing. And if you can poke around the internet and look at just how many units would have to be built to catch up for, to create adequate supply for the current tenant and homeowner base in California. It's pretty ridiculous. Anyways, what that creates over time is equity appreciation within buildings. So typically investors are investing more to kind of grow their equity within they're using the properties like super high interest savings accounts is like what I like to say. But then also by holding the properties over a period of time, they can also raise rents and kind of increase their cash flow that way. The big thing about investing here, well, it's okay if I deviate a little bit.
Please do.
Okay, so in these different markets where you see that sort of shortage of supply, San Francisco, New York City, LA, you're seeing in Denver now too, but the big things that you see is that there's typically quite a bit of they're very tenant friendly states because there isn't enough housing. And so you hear about, rent control coming up. For any investor who's new or listening to the podcast, going into a rent controlled property can be, that's where I would typically say, get in a little bit of trouble if you don't understand what you're getting into and don't have the right team around you. But if you do know how to adequately work within the bounds of this market or those markets where there is rent control, Long Beach just is under AB 1482, but LA and Santa Monica has its own rent control ordinances. But if you can understand that and take the time to really understand it and work within it, you can have a very successful investment. But I would just say, double down and really make sure you understand what you're getting into before you start buying in this market. So.
Right. Because in Southern California, I think you described it really well in those highly pressurized markets where there is a lot of competition for housing, whether it's rental units, people wanting to have a place to live in a rental unit, or people wanting to buy a house. Basically, you can't buy them with positive cash flow. So my focus has become, because of the conversations we've had, even with my clients, is that when we look to purchase something, we're looking to purchase it so that it's neutral cash flow and possibly being able to convert it to positive if there's such a thing as deferred maintenance in the building. But really, like you said, it's a high interest savings account. You're not counting on it for the cash that you're getting off of it day 1, 2, or even year 4 or 5. You're counting on it because in Southern California, the density and the demand will force up the price and value of the property that you have, even if you haven't significantly increased your rents.
And speaking of that, if you are looking to do that, and let's say you're a newer investor and you're like, I want to do this. This is like, I'm buying in SoCal. I'm doing it.
Right.
The state recently passed an accessory dwelling unit ordinance. And so I'm doing that on 2 properties right now. I'm putting up ADUs. Mm-hmm. And that's a great opportunity to create cash flow on your building relatively quickly if you can do that. So
right. So you buy net neutral and then you add another unit. Now you're creating positive cash flow.
Yes.
And you're adding square footage, which also adds resale value to the building itself.
Correct. The caveat I would say to that though is there's not enough comps yet because the ordinance is so new. So the bank, you're gonna have to wait a couple of years, I think, to get that true resale value from already adding it.
Probably. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard any good single statistic on how much ADU square footage is worth, whether it's 50% of the normal value of square footage or 75% of the normal value of square footage. It doesn't seem to go at 100%. Right?
No.
If it's $700 a square foot, because those are prices we have in Southern California, or $700 a square foot. Midwest, it's $70 a square foot, right?
Yeah.
But here it's $700 a square foot. Your ADU might go for might add value of about $500 per square foot, or $450 per square foot if you're using the 50% ratio. So, or even less, 400 actually.
Yeah.
So I know, but at the same time, I still feel like that from my point of view, within a relatively short amount of time, that square footage is going to count as square footage, period. And that's going to be, and I don't see how it can't go there, if that makes sense after,
I'm a skeptical person, and so before I made the decision to start putting ADUs up, I talked to a lot of different banks, and the lenders I work with and trust, they said, look, right now you're not going to get the resale value you want, but eventually, everyone's building these things. So we're going to have to count them as regular.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really that different from a grandfathered in, mother-in-law flat, or the 1 bedroom, 1 bath over the garage. Like it really is structurally the same thing. It's just now falling under the ADU. And I find in established houses and older houses, it's still considered that it adds value. So I really do believe it's going to continue to do that. I think it's not going to be at question that much longer. All right. So John, I got to transition because of time. So investing in real estate is great. We talked about how due diligence is super important. Trusting your team is super important, because being able to be aware of what you're purchasing is one of the ways you succeed in real estate, because real estate can be a tough mistress. She can be great. She can get you a lot of income. She can get you a year's worth of your W-2 job in one flip or in one purchase and resale. But she can also, I've written checks for losses that are way bigger than I generally want to even think about. She can be really tough, and it can be very hard if you miss something, make a mistake, or the market turns on you and you're not prepared for it. So tell me, John, about one of your real estate experiences and what it means to have real estate not work for you. How did it grow you up, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah. Back to that first duplex I didn't do the due diligence on. One of the tenants, when we bought the property, I didn't really know what to look for on a rent-controlled lease. She was on a very old lease, and there were some issues. There's some issues with the tenant. The property. So when we got there, we kind of were asking her to maybe clean up the apartment a little bit. There's a fire hazard, and she actually is a member of the tenants' rights union up in Los Angeles. And so I got to go to housing court for the first time and experience everything. And it was very challenging, I think, to kind of go through that experience, especially on a first investment. And honestly, there's a lot of fear in that. It was just kind of like, what did I get myself into? What am I going to do? This is my wife and I's first big investment. It's really scary. What now? And we made it work. By making some management changes and kind of really making sure that I guess the easiest way I would say it is when learning that house or home, I owned her home, and how I communicated with her was really important. And I think kind of respecting your tenants is really, really important. And I'm not saying I was disrespectful to her, but I think kind of going into someone's house and say, you got to clean up. It's creating a fire hazard. And she's like, well, I don't, who are you? Like, you just bought the place,
Yeah. Who are you to tell me how I'm supposed to live my life? I have the right to live my life.
Yeah. And I had a property manager do it, actually, who didn't have a good relationship with her in the first place. So it created this situation, I think, where we just got off on the wrong foot. And I think I went back and thought a lot about it, because we still have the property. It is cash flowing. We've made it work. But I think as a real estate investor, to remember that, yes, you are running a business, but you're in the business of what is someone's home or their shelter, which is super important. And I think being able to, I think if I had to go back and do it, I would have really taken the time to maybe get to understand what was really going on and ask different questions while I was in escrow and maybe when I first went to talk to her as well. Yeah. So.
All right. So given the real estate can be the mistress she can be, why are you using real estate for your personal financial freedom? And what does financial freedom mean to you?
Yeah. I really love buildings, Christina. I'm not going to lie. I really like buildings, and I didn't understand how real estate could lead to financial freedom when I first started this journey. This last year, I started my company after being at a different brokerage the day before the shutdown started. And I remember I went to Trader Joe's during work. It's kind of all day you're getting calls from the banks, they're pulling our loans. It's kind of watching everything crumble. I'm sitting there filming the brand video on our website, just dripping sweat. It's all on the news. Just like, what is going on? Like, what did I just do? And I remember I went to Trader Joe's and my wife calls me. She's like, we gotta get food. Like, what are we gonna do? And then we have a Trader Joe's across the street from our office. So I walked over there and things are picked dry. People are yelling. I'm just like, I went back to my desk and I kind of just put my head down. I was just like, you really did it now, John? Like, how are you going to get out of this?
You're really hosed now,
Yeah,
John.
I was just like, what is it? Like, so I think at that moment that what financial freedom meant for me really changed. Okay. And I think like building a company, what real estate did. And I think I really just doubled down on my belief that this is the way to create long-term wealth for me and my family. So if I don't ever have to feel like this again, like where I'm going to sit and wonder how am I going to be able to get paid, and building cash flowing sources of income, building residual income just became like that's what I care about now. I don't ever want to feel like that again. And so since then, it's been a really great journey because we got through this last year. It was tough, but we kind of got our lunch boxes, showed up to work and just figured it out, made it work. And since then, it's been really fun because we've helped a lot of our clients get through this last year too and have some success as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, surprisingly, multi has done okay. I cut you off, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I did want to kind of give you a shameless plug.
Okay.
You've always been, we've worked with some clients together, and you've always
we have.
And you've also helped me when I got started, and you've just been a great resource for me and for my clients. So I really appreciate you, and honestly, hearing some of the stories that you gave about some of the tough times you went through. Well, I went through this last year. I thought a lot about it, and I was like, there's a lot of people that went through 2008, and I don't think this is 2008, so I think I can get through this too, So.
But honestly, that moment where you described putting your head down on the desk sounds a lot like my moment where I was sitting in my chair with my head in my hands going, okay, now I've really got this hosed. Now, and that was my 2008 story, right? Yeah. This is really hosed. What am I going to do? And it changes your purpose. It changes your focus. It changes your definition of financial freedom. That's what I was about to say when you told your story. I was like, oh, that actually sounds a lot like that moment that I have where it's like, yeah, enough with the, excuse my language, enough with the messing around. I can't say the word I want to say or be inappropriate. Enough with the messing around in trying to look good or use real estate for big fancy reasons. Let's just get down to the brass tacks, which is what does my financial freedom mean for me and my family? And how am I going to make sure I stop getting distracted from that and focus on that, which is truly core, which is the freedom to have control over your time and a bank account and passive income that works. So you don't have to put your head down on the desk and go, what the heck has just happened?
Yes. And I think that it's very easy, especially if you're a newer investor, to think, I'm going to go hit the lottery. I'm going to do my first deal and it's going to be perfect. This is hard work. It is really hard work. And the harder you work, the better you will do.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
The issue, I think, kind of learning how to sift through the bull, part of my French, is the most important part of this. And having people you can trust, knowing how to do it, and really just understanding that it is a lot of work, but there are great rewards is the most important thing. So
you've just summed it up perfectly, John. I think with that, we can go ahead. How can people get a hold of you when they want to work with you as a brokerage house, or they want to understand more about how to invest on the Long Beach West Side area? How do they get a hold of you?
You can go to our website, aldenpacificinvestments.com. And we have our contact infos on there.
But let's give it anyways, because some people are listening to this as a podcast and some people are not seeing this as a video. So how do people get a hold of you? We need a phone number. We need an email address or something.
Yeah, if they want to email info@aldenpacificinvestments.com. My cell is 310-387-3489 if you want to just call me. But also we are looking for agents right now. We are growing. So if you are interested in getting into real estate and you really want to make a commitment to, kind of build your own financial future, we're more than happy to talk to you and interview. So yeah.
Cool. Alden Pacific, ALDEN, Alden Pacific Investments. Thank you so much, John, for being a FIBI member, for coming to Pasadena as often as you have, for being on this show, I think 2 or 3 times now, for being a speaker, and for being basically somebody who cares about making sure that your investors are successful, which to me, I think is probably the bottom line in being able to interact with a professional in the real estate field. This is Christina Suter with the Real Estate Breakthrough Show. You can find us each week on YouTube, on Roku TV. We're also on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and iTunes. Also, guys, I really want to hear from you. I want to hear, put it in the comments down below, whether you're on YouTube or somewhere else. I want to hear, what was your moment? What was your defining moment when you had your head in your hands or down on the desk, and it changed who you were as an investor? It got you more focused and it grew you up so that you were even more prepared and more aware of what your values truly were. Put that below, guys. We all have some really amazing stories and I want to hear them. Thank you so much.